Well, Mr. Mole, who was my form master at school, was the brother of a bishop, but he was also a chess champion. And he taught us all to play chess. And he used to play chess against 22 small boys at once, all sitting at their desks in rows with chessboards in front of them, and he went along and made his moves like that, which means that each of us had 22 times as long to think of a move against Mr. Mole as he had to think one against us, and he always beat us. He used to say that he thought chess was the most advanced form of thoughtful activity for man, because no man could ever get to the end of it. However long you lived, you could never exhaust an understanding of the game of chess. And he used to illustrate this with a story which I've never forgotten. At the beginning of the century, I think it was, there was a world chess champion. He had a Russian name, I think. And he got to the point where he'd beaten everybody in the world over and over again, and he thought of himself as an unbeatable champion. And therefore he felt the game must be changed to accommodate his skills. So he thought about it, and he invented a new chess man. It was to be called the Herald, and I don't know where it was going on the board. I think it was in place of one of the bishops. And he thought out what the Herald's move should be. And he took this to the World Chess Governing Body and said that it should be introduced. Well, they, of course, were a very conservative lot, and in any case, there had been no alteration in the rules of chess since, I think, the days of Charles I, when the pawn passing move was introduced. And so they did what all committees do in such circumstances. They postponed the whole thing until their meeting next year. But in the meanwhile, there arrived from Mexico a little boy whose name, I believe, was Capablanca, and he beat the world chess champion 5 times. So that's the last that anybody ever heard about the Herald. And I think that this same thing is true of gardening. I think that however long you go on gardening, you can never understand it. You can never learn about it. However long you've been at it, you go into somebody else's garden and you see something they do to some particular crop which you never thought of yourself and you've never seen before. And in fact, there's always somebody better growing any particular crop than you are. For instance, who could grow leeks like the Lancashire men can? And talking of leeks, an executive friend of mine walking through my kitchen garden once said to me, "It's a shame we can't have a kitchen garden because all the ground we've got is in sight of the house." I was absolutely astonished by this suggestion that kitchen gardens have to be kept out of sight like servants' quarters. Coming from a farm, we had mainly kitchen garden and just a little flower garden around the house where there was room to sit. And that's what I have now. Just a tiny bit of flower garden around the house, a little bit of lawn where we can sit, and then kitchen garden. And as gardeners always like to walk in other people's gardens, come for a walk in mine. For instance, you know what this is? It's fennel. Well, this year I'm trying to grow this fennel in a great big bush of sticks, which I'm going to allow to dry out like straw at the end of the season, and I'm going to put it in a wok or something iron like that and set fire to it, and over it I'm going to cook a bass which I catch in the sea, probably in Poole Harbour, because that's the way the French cook loup de mer, which they call bass, and I want to try it. And you'll notice that this garden has got cordon fruits. That's the way to have an orchard when you've got the tiniest garden. There's only 6 varieties of apples here and 1 pear, but if you get 2 pounds on each, you get a good variety of fresh apples, and we do the same with gooseberries. A cordon gooseberry, but not any gooseberry. Golden drop gooseberry, the only true dessert gooseberry. All the other sweet gooseberries have bitter skins, but the golden drop has a sweet skin as well. So that's the one we choose for this. And talking about learning crops, I've spent years trying to learn about onions. I don't know how you learn about crops. You learn them by instinct. You don't know what you're doing, but you get a bit better, and each year you manage to get them to pick so they'll keep a bit better. It's a question of just how long you leave them in there. Leave them a bit longer than they won't. And each year you manage to have fewer of these thick necks, these onions that go wrong and break off and never develop proper bulbs. And in the end you get rather good at it. And this year we've really done what I've always set out to do. We've got onions 12 months a year. And last year's onions must have been done just right, though I don't know quite how, because they've kept right round the year, and you can put them down alongside the new ones, which in any case are ready for the kitchen if you want them to be. So that's a satisfaction. It takes a very long time, and you don't not quite know how you do it. And this is the mint. You know, the other day I went into a garden centre and there was a very high-powered lady there trying to sell things. She said to me, I've got some very interesting mints. But of course nowadays they do have dozens of kinds of mints because they give them names to make them saleable. There's only two, I think, that are worth it. These two, the apple mint, the back, and the old-fashioned spearmint, whose mint sauce we were brought up with in the beginning. The important thing about this is, you see, that we've set them in a brick-built bed so the roots can't get out. If you aren't careful, these things will go all over the garden, so that's a special place confining the mints. And then this is a bed that I experimented with this year. It's just a short bed. I wanted to go 3 pole crops on it, and there was no way of doing it except by inventing these towers. Sometimes people grow runner beans on pyramids, tying the sticks together at the top, but of course they all cluster together then. But if you put the poles up, these are ash poles cut in the copse, and then you get a circle of agricultural hose and put a glued peg in it and turn it round and tie them up like that. You get a tower which stands up to the wind and keeps the plants apart. So that's runner beans at the top, and down here French beans. Now there were no dwarf French beans when I was young. They were all still climbers, pole beans. And that's what I still grow, because whenever anybody says, I don't believe the dwarf beans have the flavour of the pole beans. And in the middle, our only cut flower. We'd like to have the flowers in the garden, and of course we're lucky enough to live in the country, so we have flowers in all the hedges. But there is just one thing we grow for the house, which is very classy sweet peas. We get the seeds from a splendid producer of this particular crop, and each year we pick a different set of colours. So there's a different colour mixture of sweet peas, and for months on end these things go into the house and brighten it. And next year, in fact, I've chosen the colours for next year. I went to his gardens and chose the colours for next year, so I know what colour next year's sweet peas are going to grow. And they grow absolutely beautifully on these towers of mine. But when you grow them by this method, you pick out all the side shoots and clip off all the tendrils, and so they grow straight up. They grow very tall. And the time comes by halfway through the season, as it has now, when the flowers are all at the top. So then we go through a process which you can also do on a straight row of sticks, but which works very elegantly on my towers, of taking them all down again. The plants are all undone, and then you have to take it out very carefully. Take the trouble not to let it twist around the stick as it grows up, or it'll make the lowering process difficult. As a matter of fact, I think this one has twisted, just the one in the tower that has, so I'll have to work it gradually round back to one side of the pole, and then you lay it down like that on the ground. That's right, just gently round the back. And down it comes. They're very strong and flexible. They'll stand it if you go easy. I always enjoy this process. It's one of the nice things about gardening. You can do things which are apparently monotonous, but which slowly produce a pleasant result. And you can also find out how many plant ties you've used. It's only when you take them all off now and drop them in the bucket that you have any idea how many plant ties you did use in order to take the show sweet peas up that tower. One by one they come down, and you lay them round. Carefully, following the outside line of the round tower. Fasten them as low as you can without them crushing one another. Incidentally, the interesting thing about this seed is it comes from New Zealand, because this man's been growing sweet peas all his life, but he discovered in the climate of New Zealand he grew 2 crops a year. So his son got married and went out to New Zealand, and Dad's in England and the son's in New Zealand, and they grow 2 crops of the seed a year, and the seed comes back from New Zealand to here. If you saw his place in England, you would never think of it as a business with a base 13,000 miles across the other side of the sea. See, we're coming round to it now. And the last one, I think, now comes round. We've got them as low as we can without crushing them. And on my towers, this crop, when it's lowered and fastened in, has a splendid look, exactly like some stage bird's nest. And then, of course, the sun will shine on them, and the moment the sun shines on them, they'll turn their heads upwards, and you come back 10 days later. This is exactly 10 days later. And the crops have started to go upwards, and they've started to grow flowers again. And there we are with another couple of months' sweet peas, all capable of being gathered at a decent level, and plenty of pole left up above. There you are, that's this year's colours. Next year's are going to be quite different. I'll tell you something about that kitchen garden that'll interest keen gardeners. Up to 2 years ago, it was under concrete. It had been a walled garden for about 300 years, I think. But then, about 40 years ago, a family of village builders took it and built it into a yard. And for 40 years, it was under concrete. And when I took it over, I got a very nice workshop from them. But I also got a concrete yard, and we brought the machines in and smashed up the concrete. And a nearby farmer came along with his tractors and took the broken concrete away in order to build a farmyard. And underneath, we found black river soil of the sort you'd expect in the valley where I live. And I asked the man who graded it off for me with the machine to dig it down and make a hole and see how much we got. And I found we got 1.5 meters of black river loam. I thought, this is going to be the finest kitchen garden I've ever had in my life. So we cleared it up. We sent away the old bricks and the old bicycles, skip after skip of it, and cleaned it up, and we started planting things, and absolutely nothing would grow. So I got the experts along to take the soil samples. They told me that everything was there that was wanted. Every single nutritional thing was in the soil. And what must have happened was that the soil bacteria had died underneath the concrete. I spoke to a friend of mine who used to work at Kew. He said they had a yard which was under cobbles, and they had the same trouble exactly. And he said, you want to put humus in it, spent hops if you can. Well, we put cow dung and humus of all sorts in it, and we waited, and nothing happened, and nothing happened. There wasn't a worm in the whole of that land, and nothing happened at all until suddenly, quite suddenly, in the middle of the season, the whole thing came to life after 40 years. The soil bacteria were back, the worms started to feed again, and halfway through the season, it started to grow. Like that. Very interesting indeed. Anyway, that's what we managed to do with it in 2 years. And now we'll leave the garden for the river. On the river where I live, the 4 or 5 miles of water of the river where I live, there are 5 watermills. Of course, that is wonderful news for fishermen because it means slow water and fast water. It means sharp, bright shallows and splash pools. It also means deep mill pools where you can fish. And so I thought that from time to time I'd take you along to one of these mills after the other, and I would try and catch a different fish at every one. If it surprises you that there should be 4 or 5 mills in 5 miles of water, let me tell you that in the 10 miles of water above where I live, the archaeologists have found traces of 44 watermills, or some of them going back to Roman times, because the whole of this land was powered by water. Of course, those mills weren't all contemporary, but one after another they succeeded one another. And one of my local miller friends in a mill that's still working tells me he needs a 4-foot fall of water in order to run a watermill, and the fall from us to the coast is 147 miles above sea level. So you can see how many mills you really could run. They weren't, of course, all corn mills. Every sort of power was provided for the country like this. Some of them were fulling mills, which worked on the cloth. Some of them were hammer mills that drove the hammers in the days that the iron smelting was done in the south of England. And one of them is actually a bone mill. It's a little mill to which all the bones were taken from the slaughterhouse and they were ground up there in order to provide fertilizer in the days before it was manufactured anywhere else. But let me take you to just one of them. This is the smallest of them at 5 mills I spoke to you about, actually, and for me, it's in a simple, small-scale, rustic way, it's one of the most beautiful places I know. Just look at that miller's cottage, for instance. It's miles away from a nearby road, down the end of a lane. The wagons had to come down a rough road to get to it, and the miller's cottage was built there just a little bit up the slope, just above the level where the floods came to. And incidentally, if you are walking this way, you might notice that, because that is the famous giant hogweed, which is a very dangerous plant, particularly for children. You can get terrible bad skin affections from that. In fact, there's a very curious law which says you mustn't plant it in the wild. I never heard of anybody planting anything in the wild, but anyway, you mustn't, and quite right. And that's the little mill itself. Quite a tiny one. I don't think it was a big commercial mill. I think it was just a mill which supplied a farmer, or perhaps a group of farmers, who were all tenants of the same country gentleman, and they did their milling here. Now there's no longer milling. But what there is every kind of opportunity to fish, sort of corners and eddies and stickles and deeps, which fishermen like, and so you can fish there really in almost any state of the river. And here on the other end is an interesting plant. I expect you know what this may be called, many of you. It's just along the end here, right along the end of the stone wall by the river, and it's called lady's bedstraw. There's a group of bedstraw plants. I think they were used for drying out and filling mattresses in the old days. That must be the finest of them, because it's called lady's bedstraw. And I wondered why they chose this particular plant. But in those days, I thought there might be a reason, and I often thought I'd try and find out whether, in fact, bedstraw kills fleas. Anyway, now the mill doesn't work anymore, and old men like me to come fish here, and young men like him who've been on the night shift, and I've come to catch eels. And I'm terribly glad to have one on just as he arrives, because that always does a fisherman's heart good. It's a famous place for eels, this, and I'm a very great eel eater. I like them very much. And that's just a nice sized one. And he's come up nice and early. I shan't need more than a couple like that in order to produce the dish I need. They're great food crop eels. During the war, when I came home on leave, I taught a lady I know who lived in the country how to catch eels in a sack with a brick and a bait. And she used to set this sack in the nearby country house lake every night, and she fed herself very well and did very well from the sale of eels through the wartime when rationing was on. See, now we'll put this little box of bait down on the bottom. It goes on the line, and it's called a swim feeder. And that will feed those maggots gently out in the slow current of the mill pond here. And then we shall have to watch very carefully for a bite, because the trouble about an eel is he bites very, very gently and swims away with it and nibbles at it. And if you aren't careful, by the time you know he's on the line, he's swallowed the hook altogether, which is a very unpleasant business. So you have to know what you're doing if you're going to manage to hook an eel in the lip. And what I use is a little bait indicator, of a sort which I think was oh, look at that, the reed warbler. Never understood how those things fly into the reeds and through the reeds without colliding with them. It's like a helicopter going through a forest. There's the little bite indicator. As I said, I think it was invented by a Yorkshire miner who retired with lung disease, as so many of them did, and spent his time fishing, and he invented that. Somebody else hunting over there. The hen kestrel hovering over the water meadows looking for field voles. And if we watch that little indicator, it will rise or fall according to which way he takes the bait, and we managed to pick him up, I think, just as soon as he touched it, which is what we're always after. This one, I think, is a little bit bigger than the last one. So we'll take him gently. You need a very long landing net to fish off Watermills, because you always have a long reach down. He's ready for it now. Yes, he is bigger. He is a bigger eel. And I did hook him nicely in the mouth, I think. So we shan't have any trouble getting the hook out. And those two between us, between them, will just do the job we want. Right. Well, now what we do with them is we cut them up in pieces about an inch long. We put them in a casserole with some shallots and a very little water, and put them in the very slow oven overnight, and they cook very slowly all night, and then we give them all day to cool, and the juice that comes out of them turns into jelly, and we have jellied eels, which are absolutely delicious. And there's one other thing I want to tell you if you really do want to make that dish, and you ought to try it, and that is how to skin an eel. The answer is don't. All sorts of people are constantly asking how to skin an eel, but you should never skin an eel. There are some gruesome instructions for doing so. I've even got one book in which he said you ought to nail his head to the barn door and then skin him with 2 pairs of pliers. But I can assure you it's quite unnecessary. You chop the eel up into 1-inch pieces. It cooks like that. The skin keeps the flavour in, and then the skin comes off very nicely with the fish knife. Cheerio.